Hello and welcome to FranklinCovey on Leadership. I'm your host, Will Hodling, and in this podcast, we will bring you the mistakes, methods, and mindsets of many of the world's most successful leaders. We hope that the lessons learned along their journeys help you accelerating yours. Today's guest is Annie Duke. On any short list of the world's most interesting people, Annie Duke must be near the top. She is a PhD in cognitive science. She is one of the most winning professional female poker players of all time. She is the best-selling author of 3 books, Thinking in Bets, How to Decide and Quit. And she is now a prolific expert, consultant, and speaker on the topic of great decision-making. In today's conversation, we discuss how her upbringing shaped her professional career, what she learned from life as a professional poker player, how great companies make decisions, and even what she taught Matt Damon and Ben Affleck about how to be great poker players. Annie Duke, welcome to FranklinCovey on Leadership.
Well, thank you for having me.
Lovely. Thank you so much for joining us today. So I have read your books. I have listened to you on multiple podcasts before. You have one of the most interesting backgrounds of anybody that I've spoken with.
Okay.
I'd actually love to start today really diving into your personal background.
All right.
And I've heard a lot about your professional exploits, but not that much about you as a human. So I'd love to start with your childhood, actually. And if you could just share like a formative experience from growing up that has led you to be this dynamic, fascinating person you are today.
I don't know. I'll tell you, I think when I think about kind of sort of what I've focused my professional life on, it's all decision making under uncertainty. And I'm just really like dug in on that. That's kind of the only thing I think about. And I can kind of think about like 2 things from my childhood that really make that something I think that I was very drawn to. I think the first thing is that from the time I can remember, I mean, I don't remember a time that I didn't do this. A lot of my family's social time was spent playing cards. So, not poker, by the way. My dad we didn't really play poker. But games like hearts and gin and there was a game called Oh Hell, which is sort of a baby version of bridge. And me and my brother, my sister is much younger than me, so she was too young to really participate in this. But me and my brother would just spend, hours, probably about 4 nights a week, on this white shag rug in my dad's study, playing cards with my dad. And first of all, my brother was 2 years older than me. That, like, if you think about the difference between a 7 and a 9-year-old playing cards, like that's a gulf. And obviously my father was a middle-aged man, so like I was at a big disadvantage. But man, I just wanted to figure those games out and learn them. And I think that you just really, when you're playing a lot of cards, like you just really understand this problem of like the influence of luck and like not knowing. And first of all, you have to get really comfortable in that. And second of all, you start to getting really focused on, well, how do I kind of solve this problem? Like how do I figure out what people have? And then by the time I was 14, I was playing bridge with my dad as his partner. And that's really a game where there's so much about figuring out where the cards are sitting. So if you're playing the hand and the dummy's across from you, you have to figure out which cards are sitting to your left and which cards are sitting to your right. You have to do a lot of communication with your partner by the way that you're playing the cards. And so it's sort of trying to figure out like, how am I querying people and narrowing down the uncertainty. So I think that's kind of thing number 1 that was very formative to me. Just this kind of theme of like just card playing all the time when I was growing up. And then the other thing, which is kind of darker, is that my mom was, you notice I didn't say that like my mom was playing cards with us. And the reason is that my mom was really, really deeply like alcoholic until really I went off to college. Really badly so, like in other circumstances might have been Skid Row. And the thing about being a child growing up in that type of situation is that the world becomes feels very unpredictable to you. You never quite know like who you're getting or how are things going to be. And so I think that idea that things can be very unpredictable, and you have to sort of be able to navigate in that world. Things are very uncertain. You don't know what's going to happen, and you have to try to sort of predict and figure it out, just in order to be okay in that situation. I think that it's like it has this kind of strange intersection with the cards I was playing, right? Because cards was sort of this isolated game version of this problem, and then of course, I had to deal with somebody who had a really serious drinking problem when I was growing up. So I think that just got me like very interested in kind of uncertainty and unpredictability, and can you predict in those environments, and how do you actually be okay with that and accept it and structure your decision making to sort of make it so that you can at least have things turn out okay in that situation. And so those are the two things that kind of come to my mind.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing the vulnerability right out the gate, and very interesting to hear about the background and the focus on cards from a very early age. When you graduated high school and you left the house, you went to Columbia. You were part of the first female class at Columbia, is my understanding.
Oh, you did your research. That's true. Columbia was not actually, when I went, people would ask me where I was going, and I'd say Columbia, and they'd say, "Oh, you're at Barnard," and I'd say, "No, I'm at Columbia," and they'd say, "Well, no, they don't. That's an all-boys school." I'd say, "Not anymore."
It is now. Yeah, Annie's here.
Yeah.
Welcome.
And by the way, to Columbia's credit, the first class that had women in it was 50% women.
Oh wow!
To their credit, they were like, "We're
went all the way."
Yeah.
Yeah, if we're doing it, let's do it. So I'm curious. So you go to Columbia. You're part of the first ever co-ed class. Obviously, later on in your life, you get into poker, which is a traditionally male-dominated field. Is that a coincidence, or is there something about kind of your drive, something about in your personality that pushes you to be in these environments that maybe you're not the kind of traditional or primary?
Yeah. So to be honest, I wasn't really thinking about it when I applied. I had spent some time in New York when I was 16 during the summer off from high school. I moved to New York on my own. Weird thing. We could get into that later. But anyway, I moved to New York on my own, and I knew that I really wanted to be in New York. But I went to this very fancy private school, boarding school called St. Paul's School. And the reason that I went there is that my dad, who actually grew up in West Philly, he graduated from West Philly High, was not from that type of background at all. Grew up in basically what was a ghetto at the time. He was hired in 1961 at St. Paul's to teach there. And my dad is Jewish, and the school is very Episcopalian. Like, when I was there, you had to go to chapel 4 times a week. And I think when my dad first started there, it was 6 days a week that you went to chapel. So my dad was actually kind of a diversity hire. He was the Jew. They hired another one, I think, in 1977. So then there were 2 Jews that were teaching there. But at any rate, he was an English teacher, and I think that when you think about this sort of like how comfortable are you in these sort of strange situations, like where you're kind of an outcast or at least different. I'm half Jewish at this very Episcopalian place. The school, almost all the people who go to the school are very old money. There were like Rockefellers and DuPonts and Pillsburys and like name it, they were there. And, my dad's from like West Philly, graduated from a public high school in West Philly, and he's a Jew. So, and I'm a faculty kid. So anyway, I go to that school. That was a boarding school, by the way, even if you were a faculty child. So I boarded, but I definitely very much felt the difference, that I was different than the other people there. mainly I didn't have, I didn't have a trust fund for one thing. But so in between, I'd gone off to New York when I was 16. And the thing that I knew, or the couple things I knew were, one, I wanted to be in New York City. Two, it was going to make the school mad. And I knew that because at that school, it was kind of Harvard, Princeton, Yale kind of situation. Like, this was like when you think about like this idea of like these sort of privileged paths that you can get on. The admissions officers at St. Paul's like knew all the admissions officers, And just to give you an idea, I was in a class of 125. 71 of the children went to Ivy League schools. Like, wow. Nuts. Okay. And like, I mean, yeah, they were smart, but like, So anyway, so I was kind of wanting to rebel, right? Like I didn't want to be in that kind of like grouping. So, and then if you didn't, and just so you know, that the other kids who didn't go to Ivy League schools went to the equivalent, like Williams. It was like Williams, Middlebury, that kind of thing, right? So it was, did you want to go to the small liberal arts like version of an Ivy League school? Or did you actually want to go to an Ivy League school? That was kind of the choice. And then occasionally someone would get into like, Duke, and people would be like, oh, like
it's so blue blood.
Like, did you get bad grades? Like, anyway. So I was sort of trying to rebel out of that, and I knew I wanted to be in New York, but like, I only was going to rebel so far. So I was like, I want to be in New York, and there's an Ivy League school in New York, so I'm going to apply to that one.
The acceptable rebellion.
Yeah, that was my big rebellion.
Regardless, yeah.
So I wasn't actually thinking about like, did I want to be in the space that was weird, and did I want to be part of the first class? It was, I wanted to be in New York, and from my perspective, there was only one choice then. So I applied early decision actually to Columbia, because that's where I wanted to go. And by the way, it did make the school mad. They were mad. So now I think more kids from that school go to Columbia, but at the time I think there were only 2 people from my class. It was sort of like, you're going to Columbia. This is really going to hurt us. It's like, what? It's Columbia. Stop. Yeah. But anyway. Yeah.
Very interesting. So final question on your own background, and then I would love to dive into some of your amazing work and thinking. So you quit your PhD 1 month, I think, before your dissertation. And now 25, 30 years later, you wrote a book on quitting. But then interestingly, I read that you actually went back and you finished your PhD.
I did.
So how do you feel about the decision 30 years ago to quit your PhD 1 month before you crossed the finish line? And given now that you actually have gone back to complete it?
Well, first of all, I mean, one of my points about quitting is that it's part of what I teach in negotiations also, is that, you can usually come back, right? It's like sometimes when you don't exercise an option, it's dead, right? Like you can't go back. But one of the things that I hate is this kind of like one-way door, two-way door language, because it makes it feel very binary. But like, the question is like, how much does it cost to go back? Right? Like, that's the question, right? Like, how much does it cost to quit? How much does it cost you to go back? Like, is that available to you? And for most things, that option is often available for you to return to something. And I think we sort of forget that when we're thinking about quitting. But when I quit, quote unquote quit, I actually I went on leave because I was sick. I had an autoimmune thing going on. And so I was sick. And so I went on leave. I was planning to return to it. I was like pausing. And then I started playing poker and I loved it. And so I didn't go back. And that was fine. Yeah. But then what happened was I had an opportunity because I was doing some work with Phil Tetlock and Barb Mellers. And Phil Tetlock's written a wonderful book called Super Forecasting, based on work that he's done with Barb. It's an amazing book. And they asked me to start helping them to design some trainings and do some studies to improve forecasting in novice forecasters. So they had done a lot of work with what are called super forecasters, people who just really have a knack and talent for being able to forecast the future. And they came to me and said, just given your skill set and your background, maybe you would be good at this. And I created a training for novice forecasters. We actually got fantastic results. And that ended up in a collaboration where we did 4 studies. And then the opportunity just presented itself, right? It was like, okay, well, I've done 4 studies. Can I go back and write this up and have this be my dissertation? Then I can defend it. There were a few hurdles. It wasn't quite as simple as that. But yeah, so I mean, it was very opportunistic on my part. But I had been talking to them about maybe finishing a few years before that. But then we naturally fell into this research path. And then, yeah, and then I finished. And I'm very happy that I did. It was actually, for me, really nice closure. I did always have this sort of feeling of like, obviously I don't regret it. Like I was very successful at poker, but I did always have this sort of feeling of like my dissertation work did get published, the original dissertation work, and it would have been relatively easy for me to write it up and defend it. And so I always did have this sort of nagging, like, maybe I should have just closed that, just checked that off. So I'm happy that I went back and finished it.
Yeah.
But I would have been happy if I didn't either. I just want to be very clear about that. Like, but it was a nice thing to sort of say, okay, got that done.
Yep. And now you're a doctor, so that counts for something.
Now I'm official.
I assume
doctor.
you force everybody in your life to call you doctor, so it's all worth it now.
People would introduce me as like a PhD from UPenn when I hadn't finished it yet, and I would always have to go up, like when I was giving talks, they would mistakenly, and then I'd be like, just so you know, I didn't actually finish my. So now I don't have to do it. Now they can say that, and I can be like, yes, indeed, I have. Yeah. I'm a PhD from UPenn.
I'd love to hear about your more recent research on forecasting, though. How I'm a novice forecaster. Okay. I'm sure most of our listeners are. What are the ways that we can become closer to super forecasters? So
there's a couple of big ideas if you're doing it on your own. In other words, if you're are trying to forecast things, there are things that you can do in groups to improve forecasting. That's a lot of what I do, like with my clients. But if you personally want to become a better forecaster, there are a couple of big ideas. One is that you ought to know what the base rate is. So this is related to something called the outside view, which is the normal way that we sort of think about things is we like think about our own experience, like, and sort of how we've sort of thought about what's happened in the past. And then we sort of combine that with some information that we might know, and then we'll make a guess of what we think is going to happen. So we'll do this, like you see this with sales teams a lot, right? Where it's like they're sort of thinking about like what's in the pipeline and how they've closed things, and then they're coming up with some forecasts, which is often driven a little bit by sort of what they want to be true or other motives. And one of the problems with that is that you're likely to be introducing error into that by doing it that way, and the company has to budget off of that number, so you ought to want it to be accurate. So the simple idea that will actually really help you is this idea of base rates. And base rates is just looking at what's happened in a situation that's similar to the one that you're considering. So if you're trying to figure out, as an example, like what's the Q3 number going to be? It's just a starting place. It's saying, well, let me look at Q2 last year to Q3 last year, right? And what did that look like? What did we grow? Did we contract? And so you figure that out, right? So maybe you beat Q2 by 15%. That would be awesome, right? So maybe you beat Q2 by 15%. And then you could do a little more work, and you could say, like, in general, if I look at what Q1 to Q1 looked like, Q2 to Q2 looked like, right? Is it looking like we were shrinking or not, right? So basically you're going to come up with kind of a number based on what's happened in the past. That's where you're going to start. And then only then should you combine that with things that you feel are special about the situation. So you could say, okay, last year we crushed right, by 15%. But our pipeline is weak, so let me downgrade that, right? Last year we crushed by 15%, but boy, we've got two really high probability big, so maybe you're going to toggle it up. But what the base rate does is it actually sort of hews you to something that's more realistic as a starting point, as opposed to like kind of what you want to be true. So where can you use base rates? Like if you're trying to figure out how long it's going to take you to ship a product, you can look at products like that and how long has it taken to do that, right? And then that's your starting point. And then you can ask about your own special things for your situation. The best way to actually, I think about base rates is like, if you had to guess what the probability was that you hit the lottery, you would only care about base rates. Because the lottery is 100% luck, right? So in that case, you would just look at what the probability is that someone in general is actually going to hit the lottery. There's nothing special that you could ever do. So the more skill that you're introducing into something, the more that you would start with the base rate and then think about what's special to your situation, the more skill that's in something. But the base rate is always your best starting point, right? Now, how do you figure out a base rate, right? Well, you have to sort of look at historical numbers, and then you have to figure out the historical numbers that I'm looking at, are they the right reference class? And what we mean by a reference class is things that are like the thing that you're considering. And when you're trying to figure out, is this the right reference class, what you're saying is, are the things that caused those numbers to occur in that reference class that I'm looking at the same as the things that caused the numbers to occur in mine? So let me try to explain what I mean here, because it gets to this idea of dislocation. Let's imagine that you're trying to predict what the probability is that a Category 3 or higher hurricane is going to make landfall in the U.S. in this fall. Okay? Yeah. So you could either say what's the probability that's going to occur, or you have to make a forecast of the number of them that's going to occur. And you look at historic data starting from 1940. Well, that's actually a bad reference class, because we know that the things that cause hurricanes to occur, like the temperature of the ocean, are quite different today than they were, say, back in 1940 or 1950 or 1960, right? So that's actually going to give you a bad reference class. Looking more at like the last 5 to 10 years is going to be better. And that can give you a really good starting point. And then you can ask those things about what's changed. So you could ask, is the temperature of the ocean higher? That kind of thing. And then you can say, well, if it's that much higher, how much is that going to matter compared to what I've sort of seen in the past? So you have to kind of have this art of grabbing the right reference class. And then what that brings us to is this kind of really big concept, right? Which is that in order to be a good forecaster, you have to understand regression to the mean, right? That when things seem kind of out of whack, it usually means they're going to go back, right? It usually means they're going to go back, but not always. So what I mean by that is, like, let's take venture, right? So venture capital in 2021, it was super easy to raise money and the valuations were bonkers. So the question that you would ask yourself about that is it going to stay that way? Right? And all you had to do was sort of look at historically what's happened in venture and say, wow, this is really out of whack, right? It's out of whack to historically what's happened. And your best guess should always be, well, it's going to go back, right? Now, you don't know exactly when it's going to go back, but it's going to go back. It will go back. It's going to contract in some way. It may overcorrect, but it's going to come back to something close to what the average is. Now, when would that not happen? When there is actually some sort of paradigm shift. Okay, so let's think about what a paradigm shift would be. Let's imagine that you're trying to figure out, it's say 2001. And you're trying to figure out what you think you're trying to forecast what you think the growth of Amazon is going to be. Well, what's your reference class for that, right? I mean, I guess you would look at other retail stores like Walmart and Target and Kmart at the time. So you might start there, but then that's where you have to get into, is there something different about this company? And of course there was something very different about that company, which was, it was online. And that totally changes the paradigm. So when that happens, you just sort of throw all that out and you say, actually, I'm not going to assume this is going to go back to the mean because it's actually a different thing. So I'm not supposed to use the mean anymore. So just like to sort of step back, it's know the base rate and assume that things will come back to that number. That's kind of like the big idea that's always going to make somebody a better forecaster.
Yeah. We just got a crash course. This is great. Thank you. Introduction or reintroduction to some of these big terms. So one thing that's interesting in your writing and, How to Decide, Thinking with Bets, and Quitters, you focus on the importance of this very intentional, rational, probabilistic decision-making process. You focus on the importance of decision-making process over outcomes. In your consulting work, unlike a McKinsey, Bain, BCG that has 3-month-long sprints and they hand off a PowerPoint deck and they walk away, you embed yourself with organizations for years at a time. Which organizations, or maybe could you give an example of a time where you have successfully transitioned the decision-making process to be more intentional and what outcomes you generated? And then in reverse, where is it really difficult to generate a kind of change in human behavior to get people to think more systematically?
Okay, so as you mentioned, I'm not McKinsey over here, and I don't like do a sprint and then take off. And so when you're asking me like, okay, when have you been able to really change the culture of an org and when doesn't it work? A lot of it has to do with the fact that I embed. So the kind of TLDR is it's really hard to change the way that people make decisions so that they can actually be more accurate. Like everything that I do is to set up processes to basically discipline people to something that is going to be closer to the objective truth. You can't ever get to the objective truth, but it's going to get you closer to that. But it's hard. It means that you're not allowed to just like spitball and chit chat and not have any structure to your conversation and all of that stuff. And I think that's really difficult for people to do, which is why I hang around for a long time, because I really help to make sure that those processes are actually getting embedded in the culture and are actually being followed. When have I not been successful with it? That's kind of hard because I'm very picky about who I take on. They have to actually be motivated and want to do what I'm asking them to do. And I always make sure that I have someone who actually can affect the change on board. So, it's like a managing partner or the CEO or somebody like that who is into it. So luckily, I think with the organizations that I've worked with, I haven't actually been in a situation where I didn't have success. But a lot of that is because I'm choosing to get myself into environments where I will have success. And I'm very clear with people. If you're going to hire me, I'm going to be around for a really long time. This isn't like a one and done. So I actually only do 2 things in terms of interacting with orgs. One is I'll come talk to you for an hour. And that's just like, hey, here's a flavor of things you might want to talk about or think about or change. Or you're just going to have to deal with me for years. And I get asked a lot of times to do will you come in and do a 2-year training? And my answer is no. And the reason is that I think it's actually going to do more harm than good, because I'm going to give them some tools. They're going to think that they're good at it and they're fixed. And then they're going to go back to their org and it's not going to happen, but they're going to be overconfident about what the quality of their decision is. And I think it's actually going to be worse for them. So I just kind of don't do that. So I just like the way that I kind of conduct that part of my life. I'm actually setting me up for success, and I'm setting the people that I'm working with rather for success. So I mean, who have I helped to really change the culture? I mean, obviously first round. If you looked at their decision making process 6 years ago compared to what it is now, it's almost unrecognizable. Renegade, I started with them. They hadn't even done their first close yet. So their decision process, like I got to invent it for them, which was amazing.
And have you seen them work? Like, are the
Yeah.
returns? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Particularly like there's a lot of, well, I mean, yeah, I mean, because you can just sort of see the fund returns. You sort of see what the decision making look like. You can track their ability. So there's something that you can actually calculate in decision making called a Breyer score. It's really, I think it was originally developed, I might be wrong, but I think it was originally developed to measure the accuracy of meteorologists. Because they're forecasters. Obviously, you talk about the weather forecast, right? And the question there is, if you're forecasting 30% chance of rain in the forecast area, does it rain in the forecast area 30% of the time that you actually do that? And it's a way to actually measure how far off of sort of ground truth you are. It's actually the way that in my dissertation work, we scored the novice forecasters that we were training and looking at the training group versus the not training group who were getting these simple concepts. And you can actually measure what the Breyer scores are for things that we have the partners predicting. You can look at returns, and you can compare returns on certain things that they were making decisions about before and certain things that they weren't. How predictive, like how good are they at predicting companies that are going to end up in the top quartile of a portfolio compared to the rest? Those kinds of questions. And so we actually do a lot of metrics. We close the feedback loops. We are able to create maps of decision quality for any given decision maker, which is really helpful for getting them to get better at it and creating better group dynamics and better group decision making. So it's actually really exciting work that we've done. We can see the correlation with outcomes. We can improve their decision making. We can look at their historical data. We can actually create a weighted average based on what we know they're good at versus what they're not. We can upweight things they're really good at detecting signal on, and downweight things they're not, and make them even better at what they're deciding about. And it's all very exciting.
In your research and writing on great decision making, I've heard you speak out against alignment meetings and about the kind of group think or intellectual coercion that can stem from them. And I've heard a great framework about discover, discuss, decide, when to do which and how to do them. If you could just briefly kind of share that research, those ideas, I think that's something that's very practical for our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So when most people think about like what is a group meeting supposed to do, right? It's exactly what you just said: discover, discuss, decide. So you're just supposed to discover what people's opinions are, right? What do you think? What are the facts that you have? What do you think about those facts? Discuss that stuff and then make a decision, right? So that's what they think that is the group is for. But the group is actually only for one thing. It's for discussing, and it shouldn't be for discovery, and it shouldn't be for deciding. And deciding we can set aside for a moment, but let's just talk about the discovery part. So I'm not sure that there's anything in decision science that is more well-researched and more shown that if you allow people to express their opinions individually, that things get better for the group. And the reason for that is that there's all sorts of both kind of like coercive behavior that occurs when people are offering their opinion, not necessarily like knowingly, but we all know that, like, for example, if leadership expresses an opinion, it's going to change what other people are willing to say.
Yeah.
And those people may not even know that what they're willing to say has changed. There's lots and lots of groups where people are afraid to disagree, right? Just because of the culture of the group, and that's really bad. And then you just have stupid things happen, like anchoring. So anchoring is just like, imagine that we're trying to figure out what we're going to offer for a settlement in a lawsuit. And we're sort of going around the table, and the first person who speaks says, I think we should offer $1 million, right? And then there's an alternative universe where the first person who speaks says, I think we should offer $10 million. I think it's really easy to intuit that the group where $1 million is the first call is going to end up closer to $1 million, and the group where 10 million is the first, opinion is going to end up closer to 10 million. That's just called anchoring. It's a very strong effect. And that happens all the time, right? You're in a meeting and people are like, well, how long do we think this project is going to take? Or, how much is it going to cost? And people are just kind of like yelling stuff out. And there's all this kind of like influence that's occurring in those situations, separate and apart from people are afraid to disagree, period. So what I introduce into the decision processes is a concept from decision science, which is called a nominal group. And what does a nominal group mean? Well, imagine that we have a group that's going to have to make some sort of decision, right? Like we're going to have to make a strategic decision or decide how much time or money we're going to allocate to some project, or the types of decisions that we might make as a group. What I introduce into the to the decision process is, when we're first eliciting people's opinions about that, we should do that independently and asynchronously. In other words, I have some set of opinions that I get to offer. You have some set of opinions that you get to offer, and we're doing it without knowing what the other person is offering up. Okay, so we're still like a group, but at that moment, we're working independently of each other. So I'll give you an example from first round. So what used to happen at first round is...
And by the way, for those who don't know, First Round Capital is an early stage venture fund, very successful and respected in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, they're amazing. And one of the things I love about them is that they were very successful and hired me anyway. Which, if you think about it, like, that's actually super special, right? It's like they're already really successful. Why are they hiring me? And it's because they felt like they could be more successful. And I think that that's actually rare. And I just love the folks over at First Round so much, because they are so humble about their own success. So, okay, so the way it used to work at First Round was there'd be a brief, right? Which, just like the point partner would write a brief. That brief was filled with a lot of opinions of the point partner. Then the founder would come in and pitch. They would ask questions of the founder, then the founder would leave. And then a discussion would just break out, right? So they're discovering, like, hey, what do you think about that pitch? Like, so on and so forth, like all these things about that in the group setting. And it's like a free-for-all, right? And you get that stuff that's like really unproductive, where people say, I just want to double click on what Will said, right? Or they're saying, yeah, I want to add to that, but what they're really doing is just re-saying it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Which is like really unproductive time. So we changed that to introduce this idea of a nominal group. And what happens now is there's a brief. That brief is stripped of the partner's opinion, which is very important. It's like just the facts, ma'am, like Dragnet. And then the founder comes in and pitch, and that looks the same. But then when the founder leaves, there is silence. Everybody goes online to a form, and they spend about 15 to 20 minutes answering questions on the form. And the types of questions they answer things like, on a scale of 0 to 7, how strong do you think the market is that this founder's playing in? And they say that. So some of it is just like on a scale of 1 to 7, like, sort of registering the strength of something. Some of it is free-form writing, like, in 3 to 5 sentences, why do you think that about the market? So there's some of that. And then there's some forecasts, right? Like you might forecast what the probability is you think that the company is going to fund it the next round, right? So this is a seed stage company. And so you might say you're putting down a percentage, a probability that the company is going to fund its Series A, right? So it's all sorts of different stuff. So there's a whole, obviously there's more than just one question, but there's a lot of questions where they're answering 1 to 7. There's a handful of questions. So there's tons of questions where they're answering 1 to 7. There's about 6 questions where they're actually giving this sort of 3 to 5 sentences where they get to do some free form writing and kind of say why they think what they do, for sort of the bigger questions that we're asking, and then they make these forecasts. That now all dumps into a spreadsheet, and that information is then sorted into areas of agreement and areas of disagreement. So as soon as the spreadsheet is filled out, it just dumps in automatically. All the partners now have access to it. So now we're in a group setting. So we go from a nominal group setting to a regular group. And they can look and see where, like, how much dispersion of opinion there is on any given judgment that they're having to make. And then there's somebody who facilitates the conversation. And they say, okay, we agree on this, we agree on this, we agree on this. So notice that stops that stuff.
Yeah.
And then they're driving the discussion by saying, Will, you think the market's a 6, and Annie, you think the market's a 3. Will, why do you think it's so strong? But you're not in a way where you're trying to convince me. It's just, why do you think that? And then Annie, well, why do you think that the market's a 3? And then I say what I feel. And then it's like, okay, do either of you have any questions for each other? And we're allowed to walk out of the room with you thinking it's a 6 and me thinking it's a 3. It's not, why do we have to agree? Like, that doesn't even make any sense. Like, we're different people. The whole point of having different people in the partnership is that we assume there's going to be some dispersion of opinion. So you sort of go through and you sort of explore all the areas where there's more dispersion of opinion, where there's more disagreement. That does a lot of really good things. You're focusing on the places that are going to give you the most lift in decision accuracy, number 1. Number 2, you're actually normalizing the fact that people don't agree with each other. Mm-hmm. So people aren't scared of it. It sort of removes the coercion. It removes the fear.
People are probably scared at first when they first see the results come out, but over time they get used to the process.
Because they're all over the place. It's incredibly rare that all the partners but one, thinks it's amazing, and there's one person who thinks it's crap. Like, there tends to be a pretty good spread. Sometimes everybody thinks it's bad and sometimes everybody thinks it's good, but it's rare that there's like a real outlier. So that's actually not, you sort of look and you go, oh, look at that. Like, people are kind of just like me. They sort of disagree with each other. And the amount of disagreement that you see is actually greater because we don't know that we disagree with each other, which allows us to disagree more. Because you can imagine, if I really think the market's a 3 and I respect you, and you come out with, I think the market's a 6, and I hear that before I get to answer, I might say a 4 instead of a 3, because I don't want to be so far away from you. I'm a little kind of scared of that. But now we sort of see, like, oh no, like, well, actually people really disagree with each other. Yeah. So it normalizes that idea, like, people disagree, and that's fine, and we don't need to come out of the room agreeing about it. Because the whole reason that we're both in this partnership is that we have different points of view, and that's going to add to the conversation. It's going to increase the decision accuracy through that process. So you would sort of explore all that stuff. And then when you're done, remember I said decisions shouldn't occur in a group setting either. When you're done, everybody goes back to a nominal group because everybody goes to an online forum and says yes or no to the deal. And then we just have rules around how many people have to say yes. And, there's just rules around that. But they go back. And so I don't know whether you're voting yes or no when I go off to vote. I may have some sense just by knowing what the strength of your opinion is, but I don't know for sure what you're going to say. And so it's this idea of just sort of really utilizing this concept of nominal group, which is really important.
Yeah, and it's a really helpful practical practice that people can put into place soon to improve the quality of their team meetings, quality of the decision-making processes. That's great. So I'd love to move us to a speed round. You have one of the most interesting backgrounds I've ever read. And so I'm going to touch on a number of different things interesting tidbits that I found online. The first is that you won the rock, paper, scissors world championship.
I did.
What is the key to being amazing at rock, paper, scissors? Is it just go rock every time?
Well, no, you don't. That would be really bad because I'll go paper every time if you do that.
I'm joking.
I mean, you can look for patterns. You can see certain things, like very often people will throw what would have won the time before, that kind of thing. So if someone has obvious patterns, then you should do that. But then I think one of the things to understand is that assuming that you're not playing someone who does have those types of patterns, you actually just want to randomize. And I think that's really hard for people to do because somehow they think like, well, but then I'm not playing with skill. But sometimes playing with skill is recognizing that you should actually just randomize. Because if the other person is actually really good at the game, you actually want to be as unpredictable as possible. And the way to do that is to randomize. So like one of the things that I suggest is that you take out a dollar bill. You could have a whole stack of them, right? So you take out a bunch of bills that have serial numbers on them, but you could take out just $1 bill and do this because there's 10 numbers on it or whatever. And for the first throw, you say, if it's a 0, 1, or 2, I'm going to throw rock. If it's a 3, 4, or 5, I'm going to throw, right? So you can just literally randomize that way. And so then you just pull out the bill, you look at it, and then you throw what the bill tells you to throw. And I actually used that a couple times. Where I was playing against someone who I thought was very, very, very good at the game. And I think that's totally fine. I mean, just recognize when, they're going to be really good at the game and I don't want to have a pattern here. And so I took out a bill and it was very frustrating to them. They're like, wait, you're going to throw off a
decision-making process there.
And it was like, yeah, well, I'm a little concerned that you're going to figure out what I'm going to throw. So good luck to you now because I'm using a randomizer.
I also saw that you coach Matt Damon and Ben Affleck in poker. What was the most important lesson you taught them?
Well, when I'm teaching people generally to play poker, I'm sort of teaching them two big concepts. One is that they should probably tighten up their ranges. In other words, play fewer hands. But when you play them aggressively. That tends to work pretty well, particularly with more novice people. To be honest, I haven't played since 2012. Now there's all these like poker solvers and, things that are telling you exactly like what you're supposed to do. But at the time when we didn't have those things, it was two big concepts: play fewer hands, raise a lot.
Okay. You came in second in Celebrity Apprentice. In retrospect, what would you have done differently to win?
Oh, I don't know if I could have done anything different. To tell you the truth, I raised a lot more money. I never lost as project manager. Honestly, I think the only thing that I could have done was been more famous. I was against Joan Rivers, and it didn't matter that I sort of won on the metrics like that. It didn't really matter because I think she was more famous than I was. And I think that the host of that show preferred someone very famous over someone who wasn't so famous. But the rules were that the host of that particular show got to decide. So, I really don't, I can't really complain about it. I actually said, like, I remember my brother going through and being like, you're going to win because you raised more money and you didn't lose as project manager and you never were in the boardroom and you never did this and this never happened to you and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, I'm not going to win because Joan Rivers is going to win. So I had already sort of accepted that. So I don't think I would go back. I actually legit don't think I could have done anything different because I performed, like, I think I played the game really well. But in the end, she's Joan Rivers. So
there you go.
I think she was going to win.
Wonderful. So our final question we ask every guest is, obviously FranklinCovey is a leadership company. Who is a leader that you have worked with in your career that has really inspired or directed, informed who you are today, and what lesson did you learn from them?
Oh, that I've actually worked with.
Yeah. Or I guess you could take it to somebody you haven't worked with. That's great too.
No, I'm going to think of someone that I've worked with now. Now I have a different challenge. I think I'm going to say Josh Koppelman. I love all the people I work with. I'm not trying to pick a favorite here. But the reason why I'm going to pick Josh Koppelman is because, just so people know, Josh Koppelman is the founder of First Round. Multiple times on the Midas list, which is like a fancy list of like, amazing.
Top venture capitalists, yeah.
Yeah. Early into Uber, Roblox, right? The reason why I'm going to choose him is because of what I said earlier, that I think that it's very, very hard for people who are very, very successful to imagine that they're not just great. This is a concept that I really kind of learned in poker, that you can win a lot of money, like on a hand or in a game or whatever. And if your focus isn't on whether you left money on the table, it's going to be really bad for you in the long run, right? Like, so you have to obsess about, like, did I bet too much in this situation? Did I bet too little? Did I get lucky? Was there a different way for me to play the hand that would have been better? In situations where your ego really just wants to say, I was brilliant. Look how well I played that. Like, ooh, look at all the money that I made. And I think that in a world that's like venture capital, where the feedback loops are very, very, very long, they're like 10 to 15 years, and something called power law applies, which means you have a tiny few companies that are going to win, right? And then the rest of them are going to fail. And many of those companies that fail aren't going to fail because they were like bad companies, or the founders didn't have good ideas, or they weren't skillful, or whatever. It's just that's just sort of the way of that world, right? Like, you have a company will just break out. So in a world like that, where there is so much luck involved, and it takes so long for you to really find out what the final answer on a company is, like, when it actually gets to go public or something like that, it's so easy just to say, look how smart I am. I'm so amazing at what I do. I'm great. I just have a nose for value. I can spot a good founder. I'm just amazing. And in that sort of like context, for Josh to have come to me and said, like, I read your work and I'm actually kind of interested, like, in the ways that you might change the way that we make decisions around here. I just thought it was like so remarkable.
A lot of intellectual humility.
Yeah. Why would you want to say, like, well, maybe we can improve our decision making? Like, most people wouldn't want to do that because it would sort of take away from their sort of, feeling good about themselves. Right. And, now having obviously got to know Josh very well, it now obviously in retrospect doesn't surprise me, because he is just an incredibly humble human being who's just always looking to improve, looking to do better, looking to figure out where he might be making mistakes, like where he's got things wrong, what he needs to do, to improve. But at the time I was just like, whoa. And, when I grow up, I'd like to be like him.
Yeah. Well, I imagine you do have a lot of intellectual humility and ability to reevaluate your own decision-making process as well. So, well, Annie, thank you so much for joining the podcast there. Should I say Dr. Annie Duke? Thank you so much for joining the podcast today. It was a great conversation. I'm sure our guests enjoyed learning about a lot of these cognitive biases that hold us back and how to make better decisions, and from your lessons from your very, very interesting and varied career. So thank you. And for all listening, we hope you join us again next week on FranklinCovey on Leadership.